No, appreciate it. Now come to the next statement. Kevin Hollinrake, the Minister in charge.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with your permission, I'd like to make a statement updating the House on the progress that's been made to support the victims of the Horizon scandal. Since this terrible miscarriage of justice was first exposed, the Government has been working tirelessly to put matters right for postmasters. We have set up an independent inquiry and funded various redress schemes, which we have continuously improved so that we can speed up compensation for all affected. This work has been taking place for many months and long before ITV aired the excellent programme Mr Bates versus the Post Office. That includes our announcement last autumn of the optional £600,000 fixed sum award for those who have been wrongfully convicted. We continue to develop our response to this scandal, and on Thursday I made a written statement detailing the way in which we plan to legislate to overturn Horizon-related convictions en masse. We expect to introduce that legislation as soon as possible next month. My statement set out that the new legislation will quash all convictions which are identified as being in scope, using clear and objective criteria on the face of the bill. Convictions will be quashed at the point of commencement, without the need for people to apply to have their convictions overturned. The criteria will cover the prosecutors, extended to prosecutions undertaken by Post Office Limited and the Crown Prosecution Service, offence types, ensuring these align with the offences known to have been prosecuted by the Post Office. This means that only relevant offences such as theft and false accounting will be in scope. Offence dates. A set time frame will ensure convictions are only quashed where the offence took place during the period that the Horizon system and its pilots was in operation. The contractual or other relationship of the convicted individual to the Post Office Limited. Only sub-postmasters, other employees, officers or family members or direct employees of the Post Office will be within the defined class of convictions to be quashed. Use of the Horizon system at the date of the offence. The convicted person will need to have been working, including working in a voluntary capacity, in a post office that was using the Horizon system software, including any relevant pilot schemes, at the time the behaviour constituting the offence occurred. Mr Speaker, such legislation is unprecedented and constitutionally sensitive, but this scandal is unprecedented too. I am clear that this legislation does not set a precedent for the future, nor is it a reflection on the actions of the courts and judiciary who have dealt swiftly with the cases before them. However, we are clear that the scale and circumstances of the miscarriage of justice demands an exceptional response. We are also receiving invaluable support from the Horizon Compensation Advisory Board in this effort. And once again, I'd like to thank the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Member for North Durham North, and his colleagues on that board, including Noble Lord Arbuthnot. The board again met on Thursday. We were joined by Sir Gary Hickinbottom and Sir Ross Cranston, who will be the final arbiters of claims in the overturned convictions and GLO schemes respectively. At the meeting, the board strongly supported the proposals in my written statement for legislating to overturn convictions. They also proposed sensible measures to accelerate compensation for those impacted. One of the biggest constraints on the speed of redress for those who choose to take the full assessment route is that it takes time for claimants and their representatives to gather evidence and develop their claims. To encourage early submission of claims, once the Post Office receives a full claim from someone with an overturned conviction, it will forthwith top up their interim redress to £450,000. Of course, if they have opted for our £600,000 fixed sum award, they will get that instead. Similarly, on the GLO scheme, where claims are typically smaller, we have implemented fixed sum award offers of £75,000, helping claimants move on with their lives. Others who are not satisfied with this fixed offer can continue to submit larger claims, and they will be assessed on a case-by-case basis. We have committed to provide offers on a fully completed claim within 40 working days in 90% of cases. If initial GLO offers are not accepted and then enter independent facilitation, we shall forthwith pay postmasters 80% of our initial offer in order to help ensure postmasters do not face hardship whilst those discussions are completed. We've always been clear that our first offers of compensation should be full and fair. It is early days, but the numbers suggest in the GLO scheme that we are achieving that. Over 70% of our offers in that scheme are accepted by postmasters without reference to the independent panel. We will also ensure that postmasters are kept regularly up to date with the progress of their claims. The Advisory Board has made a number of other very helpful proposals. Those are set out in the report of the meeting which my department is publishing today. I've undertaken to give them very serious consideration. I shall, of course, advise the House when we've reached decisions about those proposals, and, Mr Deputy Speaker, I will doubtless return again with further updates as part of our unceasing determination to deliver justice for everyone caught up in this long-running and tragic scandal. With that, I commend this statement to the House.
Opposition front bench, Rushanara Ali.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Minister for advance sight of his statement. The Horizon scandal has rightly left the public outraged at the scale and shocking details of the injustice that has been committed. The scandal is one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in British history. It has robbed innocent people of their livelihoods, their liberty, and all too sadly, in numerous cases, people's lives. Over 20 years on, the victims and their families are still suffering from the consequences of the trauma of all they've been put through. And until recently, there has been little progress and only delays at every turn, which has caused even further distress. Victims and their families have been trapped in a nightmare for too long. We all want to see the exoneration of all the remaining convictions and the delivery of rightful compensation to all those affected sub-postmasters as quickly as possible. And on this side of the House, the Labour Party has made clear we want to see a swift and comprehensive resolution to this insidious injustice, and we are committed to working with the government to ensure this happens. I recognise the important work the Minister has done, both in the backbench as well as in his role as a Minister. The unprecedented scale of the legal work being carried out is only going to be possible with cross-party working and cross-party support. And I want to also take this opportunity to thank the Advisory Board for their tireless work in supporting the government in getting this right, and also to honourable members on both sides of the House, here as well as in the other House. And I welcome the Minister's commitment to progressing the legislation. Labour is committed to working with the government to deliver rightful exonerations. But I know that many members will have had questions following last Thursday's written ministerial statement. So I welcome the Minister returning to the House today. And I wanted to pose a series of questions to him. Firstly, can I press the Minister on what exactly we could expect in terms of the legislation being tabled, and further details on that in light of what is said today? Could the Minister please further clarify why convictions prosecuted by the Department for Work and Pensions are excluded from this legislation, and what steps he will take to get the Department for Work and Pensions to deliver exonerations as soon as possible? The proposals the Minister is suggesting are setting a very difficult precedent, as he said, on the relationship between the legislature and the judiciary. Can the Minister outline what conversations he has had with the Lord Chancellor on his views on this matter that might alleviate some continued concerns people may have. There are also, of course, as he's mentioned, issues around precedent that could be exploited in the future for less appropriate purposes. And while I appreciate the assurances he's provided about precedents, it would be helpful to understand and get clarifications on what specific safeguards will be put in place to avoid this not becoming a precedent. And the cross-party nature of working is, of course, critical to making sure that this happens. But does he, for instance, some are asking the question, does the Minister consider this particular example as one that could be relevant in future for other worthy causes? Can I also ask the Minister about the pre-Horizon scheme capture? Can he confirm whether prosecutions were made using capture data and whether any sub-postmasters lost money due to capture failings? And if so, will he commit to these convictions being in the scope of this legislation and compensation schemes? Thank you.
Minister.
Can I thank her for her collaborative comments, and I'm very keen to work with her going forward, as I've been every step of the way on this particular issue. I don't accept that we've made little progress, and let's be clear, 78% of all full claims that have been submitted have been settled. That's 2,700 claimants that have been settled. And nor do I accept there's been delays at every turn. I don't think it's a correct characterisation of the situation. In terms of our next steps on the legislation, as I said in my opening remarks, we expect the legislation to be tabled next month, so not as quickly as possible, and working this on very much a daily basis. In terms of the differences between the Post Office's cases and the CPS cases, which are the ones we are seeking to overturn with this legislation, and the DWP cases, there is a different standard of evidence, I think it's fair to say. Largely those cases relied on independent evidence, independent of Horizon. For example, the surveillance of suspects, collation and examination of cashed orders from stolen benefit books and gyro checks, handwriting comparisons and witness statements. So very not simply relying on Horizon evidence. In terms of my engagement with the Lord Chancellor, extensive, and our engagement with other stakeholders has also been extensive, including with her own shadow front bench colleagues. We decided this was the right thing to do. Having said that, these are unprecedented steps, and I think, again, speaks to the fact that we are keen to make as much progress as possible rather than little progress. In terms of safeguards, she's right to set that out. I think two things I would say is the standard of evidence is critical to get to this point. And I think it's fair to say the trailblazing 555, who took this case to the courts in the first place successfully, is a hugely high bar for anybody to try and emulate or replicate. The other thing we're doing with this legislation would be very clear that these convictions will be overturned based on objective criteria, and I think that's another way we would deal with this. And I think that speaks to the last point she raises, which is regarding capture, something I'm very aware of, and I've discussed with the Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for Durham North, on several occasions, including immediately prior to this making this statement. I think what we need to do with that is make sure we have the right evidence base. I'm very happy to continue this discussion, the dialogue around it, but it's important that we don't simply include cohorts where we don't have the evidence base, where we do within the courts we set out the CPS and the Post Office prosecuted cases, because these are very serious measures we are taking to overturn these convictions. We should never resort to this kind of approach lightly.
Sir John Redwood.
Will he take UK government investments out of its role of controlling and supervising the Post Office? They have allowed these gross injustices to go on for too long. They've allowed the Post Office senior managers to rack up losses of £13.91 million to last March, with more to come this year, and given the Executive's bonuses for losing us that much money, and they've left the government with a great financial black hole. So wouldn't it be better if he changed the Post Office management, they reported directly to him, and their number one task was to give justice to the sub-postmasters?
Well, thank you for this question, and we've had serious conversations about the future of the Post Office, which I'm keen to continue to engage with him on. The current representative for UKGI, who sits on the Post Office board, is Lorna Grattan. I have a great deal of time and respect for her. Clearly, it's important the inquiry does its work in determining who did what in terms of the past as we look to the future. But again, there are different opinions on how we should govern the Post Office moving forward. We're very happy to keep those discussions ongoing with him.
Marion Phillips.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for a previous sight of his statement. Post Office Limited has, of course, under successive Labour, Tory and Liberal ministers, overseen the largest miscarriage of justice in UK history, and Horizon is just appalling. Unusually, Minister, both the Scottish and Northern Irish governments have written calling for the UK government to rule on devolved affairs. It's vital that the UK government works to ensure that exonerations in Scotland and Northern Ireland can take place at the same time as those in England and Wales. Mr Deputy Speaker, I don't find this amusing at all. Obviously, the honourable member sitting opposite finds it funny.
Shameful. Utterly shameful.
Thank you. Devolved governments have no power or locus in UK Post Office. So we really need to get this together. I'll simply ask the Minister, when will legislation both for exoneration and redress schemes be published? Scottish and Northern Irish governments have written asking therefore to be UK-wide legislation. We need the UK government to act, as otherwise we cannot guarantee there will be simultaneous legislation which is compatible and comparable with UK government schemes. When will there be a response to the Scottish Government? This is really important. Mr Deputy Speaker, given reports that yesterday that Post Office Limited have only now brought in external investigators to investigate their internal investigators, does this not seem quite late to him? Why has this not been done earlier? Is it just to avoid the appearance of continued cover-ups in Post Office Limited?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank you for her work and a point she raised, including the devolved issues around Scotland and Northern Ireland. She's right to raise this. Obviously, we consider this very carefully. When we originally set out to legislate, we were very clear it would be England and Wales only, but we'd work with our counterparts in terms of what the other parts of the United Kingdom might do. And indeed, we have responded to them already and met with them last week, or before we announced this legislation, in terms of made this statement to the House. The reasons we decided to do England and Wales only: justice is a devolved matter. The Post Office is UK-wide, as she says, but justice is a devolved matter in Scotland and Northern Ireland. And they have different legal systems, of course, in those areas, different prosecutors. And taking this action to interfere with the independence of the judiciary is a very, very serious thing to do, of course. So we believe this is the right way. We're working closely with our counterparts in the devolved administration to ensure they understand our legal approach. We're very happy to assist with any legislation they may seek to undertake in their own parliaments. In terms of redress, of course, redress is a single UK-wide scheme. So once somebody's conviction is overturned, they can access the redress just as they would be able to do for anybody whose conviction had been overturned in England and Wales, exactly the same. In terms of the issues raised about the investigation of investigators, I think that is a matter initially for the Post Office, but also for the inquiry to see what's happened in the past. I think it's little point in spending the huge expense of setting up a public inquiry, as members of this House called for, and then seeking to do that inquiry's work ourselves. So we need to see exactly what the inquiry makes of that and many other issues.
Mark Pausing.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. May I first of all commend the Minister and the Secretary of State for the consistent and firm approach that the Government is taking to getting justice for the affected postmasters. But we heard earlier about precedent, and the Minister will know that many of us have concerns about precedent in bringing forward special legislation in this case, although of course we know that many hundreds of innocent postmen have suffered the most serious miscarriage of justice. Now, the Minister just said that the scale and circumstances of the Post Office actions in this case rightly require an exceptional response. Can he set out how using that mechanism will ensure that the people we're bothered about, the postmasters, benefit speedily and accurately from these measures?
Minister.
Well, can I thank him for his point and his work on the Select Committee. He's right, we would take these steps very carefully and very much as a last resource. I think where he concluded his question is exactly the right point. This is about postmasters and speed of overturning those convictions, the speed to justice. And of course, we looked at doing this through other means. We did not feel they would achieve the same level of speed. And he may be aware that hundreds of people have passed away, a report recently in the newspapers over the weekend, waiting for compensation, waiting for justice. That's just not acceptable. We made the difficult decision to deal with this in this particular way. As we've often described it, this is the least worst option, but it is still the right option.
Chair of the Select Committee, Liam Byrne.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I put on record my gratitude to the Minister for the speed and attention that he is paying to this issue. The truth, however, the bottom line, is that redress is too slow and the offers are too low. And papers which the Select Committee is publishing this afternoon show that at the core of that problem is a toxic culture of disbelief of sub-postmasters, which still persists at the top of the Post Office. Indeed, in the board minutes for March last year, it shows that board members lament the board was tired and constantly distracted by historical issues and short-term crises. I'm afraid that is not good enough when only 40% of the allocated budget for the Horizon scheme has been paid out, and only 4% of the budget for the overturned conviction scheme has been paid out. So when the Minister brings forward his bill, will he make sure that the Post Office is now taken out of every single one of the compensation schemes, and a hardwired instruction to deliver with a fixed, legally binding timetable for delivering compensation agreements is written onto the face of the bill?
Minister.
Well, thank you for his points and his kind words earlier, and also his work on this particular matter. I know he's having a session tomorrow in the Select Committee on this. I look forward to his recommendations. I agree the compensation has been delivered too slowly, and that's something we're seeking to accelerate every single day, and we're doing good work, I think, with the advisory board in terms of trying to make sure that's the case. I don't accept offers are too low. I'm not saying there aren't cases where there are. That is not the case. Certainly in terms of some of the cases, and any compensation scheme will not be 100% perfect. But if you look at the numbers on the GLO scheme, for example, 58 offers full offers have been submitted, 41 have been accepted, without reference to the next stage of that process, which is the independent panel, which tends to indicate the offers that have been made are fair. Of course, people will not take my word for that. They'll only accept that when the resolution to those cases has been achieved. And there are bound to be high-profile cases, as there are, of people who say those offers are too low. We are determined to make sure everybody gets full and fair compensation, fair to the individual, fair to the other individuals within the schemes, and also fair, of course, to the taxpayer. In terms of the people running the scheme, well, he is aware already The HSS was set up as a scheme run by the Post Office. It does have an independent panel with people like the Noble Lord Garnier, who sits on that panel. So eminent KCs. I've met with that panel, as the Honourable Gentleman, the member for North Durham, Right Honourable Gentleman for North Durham has. We have confidence in that panel, but nevertheless, we are looking at recommendations to the Advisory Board for an independent appeal process. The GLO scheme is independent of Post Office. It's within our department, and we are working to make sure those offers are fair. The overturn conviction scheme, we are looking at bringing that back in-house, as he suggests we will, and we'll have further advice on that, further position on that in due course. In terms of the 40% of the budget, well, that's of course, we set this maximum budget of £1 billion. Not that there is a cap, but that's a maximum budget at this point in time. Part of the reason why there's only 4% of overturned convictions have been settled is because the convictions haven't come forward, haven't been overturned. That's why we're legislating like this. Once those convictions, hundreds of convictions, have been overturned en masse, those people will be able to access rapid compensation via the fixed sum award, which literally is a days in terms of getting compensation, or the full assessment route, which does take longer. His idea is a fully legally binding route. Of course, we'll look at all different ideas. We have just legislated, and I think he supported the legislation we brought forward, to extend the timescale for compensation for the GLO, because we didn't want to be hidebound by an arbitrary date. So I would just caution him against suggesting a legally binding date, because not everything was is within our gift in terms of when we receive the claim and therefore how fast it can be processed.
Richard Bethnal.
Deputy Speaker. The Minister will be aware from my correspondence about the case of my constituent, Mr Graham Ward. Graham was one of the 555, part of the group litigation order, and he's been in touch with me in the last week, and I think it's fair to say he's echoed his deep frustrations around the processes that this House is currently discussing around access and redress to compensation. The £75,000 fixed sum offer is less than the impact he's experienced. And I note from the Minister's statement on page 3, he speaks about the 40-day process if people wish to go through that rather than just accepting the lump sum. Can I suggest to the Minister that this is looked into, because Graham is having to go through medical assessments, various doctor's appointments, and to be quite frank, this is really just a terrible ordeal that continues for him. And it's not just for Mr Ward, but it's for so many others that have been part of this. And I'd really urge the Minister to bring the human element to this and recognise that £75,000 doesn't even scratch the surface when you've lost your business, your livelihood, the goodwill and your reputation. And that's what we must restore sooner rather than later.
Yeah, can I thank you for constant correspondence and engagement on this particular issue, Mr Ward. And I wrote to her, I think, only recently on that particular case, and I asked her, please keep me updated on Mr Ward's progress. To be very clear, the £75,000 is one of two routes that people can take. If they feel that their claim is below £75,000, they don't have to submit any evidence. They can simply opt for the £75,000, take that money off the table, move on with their lives. Where they feel their claim is significantly higher than that, or higher than that at any point, they can go through a full assessment route. That inevitably takes more time. And because it is complex to assess somebody's loss, both in terms of their financial loss, which does require forensic accountants on behalf of the claimant to submit a claim, and it requires other assessments of the type that she sets out. So it is complex. Any compensation scheme I have been involved with in my time in this place has been complicated. We've tried to simplify this. We've discussed measures on this with the Advisory Board only last week, how we accelerate that. But the fundamental principle of this, of course, is that claimants like Mr Ward should always get the benefit of the doubt.
Kevin Jones.
Thank you. First of all, can I declare my interest as a member of the Horizon Compensation Board, and can I thank the Minister for his statement. It's welcome to see him rather than the Secretary of State producing this statement today. I welcome the approach which the government are taking in terms of the overturned convictions, but I do note that it includes pilots, and I have discovered, and I've given the evidence to him and the public inquiry about the capture system. Those individuals need to be included in any overturned convictions and also to get compensation. The evidence for them I am slowly getting out of the Post Office and from individual cases, And it comes back to a point that the Select Committee Chair has just made about the role of the Post Office. He's written a letter last week, over the weekend, to the Select Committee saying the culture has changed in the Post Office. It clearly has not. That toxic culture is still there. And until they're taken out of this process altogether and be forced to regurgitate the information there, nothing will change. He knows that one of our recommendations from the Advisory Board is to do exactly that. But until we actually do that, I've got to say, postmasters will not have any faith with this process.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank him again for his work, both in his tireless work over the years and indeed his work in recent months on the Advisory Board. It's hugely important to accelerating this process, so I thank him again. We've discussed capture on a number of occasions. I think it's important we have the right body of evidence on that, and I'm again keen to work with him to make sure that we have. Clearly, intervening in matters that were independently decided by the courts is something, is a step we take very rarely, unprecedented in this context. But I'm very happy to discuss that further with him and to help him seek evidence from the Post Office where he needs more evidence to be able to support that particular area of this issue. In terms of the Post Office, we discussed this last week. I'm very keen to make sure that we have this process running as independently as possible. I can assure colleagues and any claimants out there and the wider public is that every single process, not least the GLO scheme and the overturned conviction schemes, has an independent reviewer in it. So Sir Gary Hickenbottom for the overturned convictions, Sir Ross Cranston, of course, for the GLO. These are very highly regarded individuals who will make sure that postmasters who come forward are fairly treated and get the redress they deserve.
Siobhan Bailey.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Listen, I welcome the care that's been taken to set out how extraordinary this circumstance is and that we're not leading ourselves into setting any precedents, and I welcome the scrutiny of the bill as it comes forward. But on compensation, it is right that evidence is checked and that we are thorough, but I am concerned that the government's payment clock is only starting to run when the government is satisfied that it has all of the information on individual cases, and for some postmasters it's very difficult for them to collate documents over 20 years, some of which have been destroyed or damaged, and this is causing a lot of stress, similar to the points that the Right Honourable Member for Witham has made. Now, can my Right Honourable friend explain the position regarding evidence, and with this process of trying to speed up the payments, are we able to get to the point where we're taking a view on claims so we can kickstart that 40-day process and get the money out of the door?
Okay, I thank her for her engagement on this and her work on behalf of her constituents, which I'm very aware of. Yes, absolutely, we should be taking a view where evidence is impossible to obtain. Of course, it's fair to request certain bits of information where it is to support a claim, but where it's not available because it's 20-year-old, 25 years ago, then that would be reasonable to expect that as the basis for a claim. So, of course, as I said earlier, there is absence of evidence, but there is a broader claim which is compelling. There is no doubt the claimant should get the benefit of the doubt. I'm very keen to make sure her constituent gets compensation as quickly as possible.
Andy MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Could I just take the Minister back? Before I do, thank him for his work on this and his predecessor. I know he's been paying a lot of attention to it. But on the issue of full and fair compensation, can I just express a worry about the 600,000 option? And it's been said that this is a complicated process. It doesn't really have to be. Schedules for special past and future loss are regular events to be able to calculate these matters. And if ever there were a case for aggravated and exemplary damages, then surely this is it. And my fear is that people up against time limits, and perhaps those are getting older, will want to accept the 600,000, which will be a vast undersell of the true value of their claim. So I just ask the Minister, what mechanisms is he putting in place to make sure that people are not undervaluing and taking that easy option to bring this matter to a close?
Thank you. Well, you raise a very fair point, and full and fair compensation lies at the heart of this. We don't want people to feel this is the only option to get compensation in quick time. The £600,000 is there for people who want to take that money and walk away and draw a line under things, particularly where people think their claim is below that figure. He may have heard in my remarks earlier that what we've also done on the basis of recommendations from the advisory board and others involved in the process, that as soon as a claim is received, a full claim is received, that individual in the overturned conviction cohort would get their interim compensation of £163,000 topped up immediately to £450,000, which eases that financial pressure, reduces the incentive that he might suggest there is, to take a claim that's lower than people might deserve, because there was a significant amount of money paid forward on that basis, while the remainder of the compensation claim can be properly assessed.
Duncan Baker.
Speaker, I want to echo some of the words that were made by the Shadow Minister. I had an email overnight, actually, from a lady in Australia whose father was prosecuted under the DWP. He's been extremely ill. He was given a 6-month prison sentence for a crime he didn't commit. But from the statement this afternoon, it's clear that the scope of the bill only applies to prosecutions from the CPS and the Post Office Limited. So these new laws are outside the scope for those who receive sentences from the DWP. That can't be right, Minister.
Well, can I thank him for his points? We looked at this very, very carefully. All the appeals based on DWP cases, the convictions have been upheld thus far. Clearly, this is very rarely that we take the kind of route we are taking now, which is summarily overturning convictions. We do see that the evidence bar was much higher in these cases. As I said earlier, there are surveillance of suspects, collation and examination of cashed orders from stolen benefit books and gyro checks. So there are some significant evidence bases to these particular convictions. I would point out that people can still appeal their convictions, can go through the normal court of appeal route. Very happy to have a discussion with him after this statement, discuss his case further, if that would be helpful.
Andrew Bridgen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And after 14 years of campaigning on behalf of my constituents, Mr. and Mrs. Rudkin, and the wider victims of this, the sub-postmasters, I welcome what we apparently have now is almost a weekly update on the compensation scheme. I welcome the fact that the Minister announces more generous interim payments for the victims, but I have to disagree with him when he says that the sub-postmasters Horizon scandal is unprecedented. I'm thinking, Mr. Deputy Speaker, of the infected blood scandal, the so-called Gulf War syndrome repayment scandal, the banking fraud scandal, and of course, with all this House will have to look forward to the vaccine deaths and vaccine harm scandal, which will overshadow everything that's come before. Does the Minister think these issues would benefit from a docudrama?
Well, my responsibility only extends as far as the Post Office in those particular scandals he outlines, and so I do come to the House quite often and probably got enough on my plate in dealing with these right now. But I'm very keen to make sure that I thank him for all the campaigning he has done from the backbenches on this particular issue, and I very much hope Mr. and Mrs. Rudkin get the compensation they deserve as soon as possible.
Johnson.
Deputy Speaker, and the Minister's quite right that I think he just said that he comes to the Chamber and the House quite often to discuss this particular scandal. I just wish that ministers in other departments dealing with other scandals would come as often as the Honourable Gentleman does, and I want to compliment him on that. Can I just ask the Minister, could he just confirm that all those with overturned convictions will see that they are compensated before the general election?
Well, can I thank her for all her work on this, but also in the infected blood scandal, which, again, as backbencher, is something I contributed to as well, and just tremendous work. I understand £400 million has been paid out in interim compensation, but I know she won't rest until all those people that she represents get full and final compensation, quite rightly. In terms of overturned convictions, not everything is within our gift, of course. So we are summarily en masse overturning convictions. We hope to do that very, very quickly, of course. We're tabling legislation next month. That's our plan, and we hope to overturn all those convictions by July. That then opens up the door for compensation through the two different routes for those overturned convictions. We are somewhat at the mercy of the actual claims being submitted themselves, which can take time. The £600,000 route is much quicker. I can't tell when the general election is going to be, so I can't specifically say say yes to her question. But I very much hope so. Our original date was August. We certainly hope to get everybody compensated by the end of this year. We'll do everything we can to make sure that is the case.
Sarah Olney.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. Obviously, we understand why the legislation for overturning convictions has to be limited, but we've heard today from the member for North Durham, the member for North Norfolk, about convictions that have been that were secured outside of those so different kinds of systems and different prosecutors. I wonder if the Minister could say what kind of assessment has been done of the likely extent of people who might have been wrongfully convicted but will fall outside of these particular boundaries that have been set, and what might be made available for people who will want to bring their own appeals against wrongful conviction but cannot make use of the forthcoming legislation.
Okay, thank you for a question. I think it's fair to say, there is a very significant body of evidence that we can all see now where these are wrongful convictions, and we think that is the reason we're acting in this unprecedented way. In terms of other cases, it depends what you're referring to, whether it be the capture cases that have been raised before. Again, we don't have that body of evidence thus far. In terms of the DWP, we think that's a different cohort in terms of evidential standard, and we'd only act here, we're acting this way because we don't think the evidential standard was at the right level, and clearly there was a number of different factors involved in these convictions in the first place. We think that's different in DWP. We think the numbers of cases are around 70 to 100 cases in the DWP cohort, which means the vast majority of the 983 convictions that we're aware of will be overturned by this legislation.
Barbara Keeley.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I want to raise again with the Minister the shortcomings of the Horizon Shortfall Scheme. Because my constituent, Mr Pennington, was a sub-postmaster for over 20 years, and for 11 of those years he had the stress and worry of continually having to pay back shortfalls generated in error by the Horizon system. He has not received back all he was forced to pay in, and he was only offered a derisory £1,500 for what amounts to 11 years of stress and being put into financial distress. Now, I wrote to the Minister about this case 5 weeks ago, and I've still not received a response. And last week, the Business Secretary said I would receive a letter very soon. How long will Mr Pennington have to wait for answers to his questions after so many years of financial stress and worry?
I'm grateful to a point. Can I chase that correspondence as soon as I leave this statement? And I thought I had signed her correspondence, but I apologise she's not received it. I'll make sure she receives it at the earliest possible opportunity. I know I'm familiar with her case, having read about it and the time she's raised it in this House and by other means. Very keen to look at that, and also to make sure across the board we've got some recommendations from the advisory board about how we make sure everybody feels their settlement was fair, and so we're looking at those kind of recommendations now. But I will get that letter back to you as soon as I can.
Samuel Wilson.
Speaker, can I thank the Minister for the urgency which he has brought to trying to resolve this terrible injustice against resistance, it seems, from within the Post Office, where there is still an attempt to cover up the negligence and incompetence of the management. But could I just take him back to the points which he has made about this legislation applying to Northern Ireland? I'm not convinced of the reasons he has given. That first of all, this is a devolved issue. Secondly, that the justice system is different in Northern Ireland. And thirdly, that he doesn't want to step on the feet of the judges in Northern Ireland. In the past, there has been legislation which has gone through this House, which has been relating to the Department for Justice in Northern Ireland, and which has been Northern Ireland has been included as a result of a legislative consent motion. Has he explored that opportunity with the Minister in Northern Ireland and with the Executive? Has there been resistance from the Department of Justice in Northern Ireland, or are they willing to cooperate if that were to be included?
Well, I can thank him for his points, and I think he's contributed to every debate I've had in this House on this particular matter, so thank him for his work. Well, clearly, justice is a devolved matter to Ireland. The judicial system is a devolved matter to Northern Ireland. I think the difference here is it's not simply legislating for general matters across the piece here. It's about overturning individual cases, which is unprecedented, certainly in my experience and what I understand to be the case. We've engaged with the Justice Ministry in Northern Ireland. Very happy to continue to do that and very happy to talk to him about the points he raised. These are difficult decisions to make, and that was the decision we've taken, but as I say, I'm very happy to have a further conversation with him.
Kate Osborne.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Mr Deputy Speaker, the sub-postmasters have no trust or faith in the compensation processes being handled by the Post Office or the Government. Today's commitments will still not deal with all the inequalities in the schemes or the undue influence the Post Office still has on the process. So I want to echo the sentiments of some of my honourable friends and ask, will the Minister agree to place the compensation schemes into an external, independent body completely outside the influence of the Post Office? I asked the Prime Minister, and my honourable friend asked, around the timescales for the legislation to overturn the convictions. We still haven't got an answer. If it's not before the general election, will it be before the summer recess? And finally, when will people be held account for this miscarriage of justice, whether that be within the government, within the Post Office, within Fujitsu?
Okay, thank you for her campaigning on this, and again, she's engaged. She's been a key part of the campaign to make sure that people receive justice. In terms of fair compensation, I say on the GLO scheme, of the 58 full claims that have been submitted, 41 have accepted without even going to the next stage, which would tend to indicate those first offers are fair. I am aware of some people who feel their particular offers aren't fair, but I think it's wrong to look at individual cases in this context. But it's right that we look to make all the schemes fair. In terms of undue influence, be clear that every part of this process has an independent element to it. Under the GLO scheme and the overturn conviction schemes, this is both retired judges, Sir Gary Hickenbottom and Sir Ross Cranston, to make sure that this is independent of Post Office, of any undue influence, as she puts it. We are looking clearly. The GLO scheme is not being run by the Post Office. It's run by my department, Business and Trade. We are looking at recommendations from the advisory board about what we do with that in terms of the cases going forward, the new cases of overturned convictions. In terms of timescales, I think we've been pretty clear today, actually, that we would table this legislation in March, and we hope this legislation completes its passage through both houses. Although, again, that's not entirely within our gift. By July at the latest.
Stephen Farry.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Around this time last week, I reiterated my call to the Government to include Northern Ireland inside this legislation, and I was very disappointed to see it only applies to England and Wales. There is a cross-party consensus in Northern Ireland for this House to take this legislation forward, including my colleague, the Justice Minister, the First Minister and Deputy First Minister. The Executive has just been restored. It's a large work programme to get through. There's a very small number of cases in Northern Ireland. This legislation, doing our own legislation, would require disproportionate effort and would involve considerable delay, which would remove equity across the UK. So, reinforcing the points from my colleague, the Justice Minister, will the Minister reconsider the position as regards Northern Ireland and include it inside the legislation? I understand it is relatively straightforward to do.
Okay, I thank him for his points. I'm sorry to disappoint him. I understood last week he may be disappointed about what we were about to announce later in the day. I spoke to the Justice Minister that day as well. We wanted to talk to her before actually informing the House about our intention. Of course, I'll continue to engage with him and the Justice Ministry in Northern Ireland, as with my colleagues and officials, to make sure there is no delay for the people who are affected in Northern Ireland. Of course, happy to have a continued conversation with him about it.
Amy Callaghan.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I thank the Minister for his statement and for his continued dedication to the victims of Horizon. Will the Minister apologise to my constituent Louise Darr, former sub-postmistress in Lenzie, for the devastating damage Post Office Limited and Horizon had on her and her family's life and livelihood? And will he ensure compensation is swiftly given to Louise and all other sub-postmasters?
I'll apologise for that hesitation. What's happened to Louise and her family is a disgrace, and never should happen. We never should be in this place. We are where we find ourselves. What we need to do now is exactly what she sets out, which is seek to deliver compensation as quickly as possible. If she'd like to have a conversation about me on that particular case, very happy to help where I can.
Speaker, I come to the House virtually every time that we have questions on this or it's before the House, and I'm taken in by the Minister's mellifluous sort of bromides about the compensation scheme. But then I read the letter from the Chief Executive of the Post Office, Nick Reed, where he suggests that over half the convictions are safe and that the Post Office would defend them. And then, furthermore, that they're taking on expert police investigators to investigate the investigators, which is pouring even more money, good money after bad, in my opinion. So, just exactly how can the sub-postmasters who've been convicted in this process and those that have been wronged in this process of this Horizon scandal have any confidence in a scheme that has any influence in it at all by the Post Office? And just how much is the government relying on information from these investigations by the Post Office in the decisions it's making?
It does contribute every single time, virtually, on this particular issue, and I thank him for that. And it's hugely important that the postmasters in his constituency and further afield have his voice contributing to the remedies that we need to get for them. I'm aware of the letter from the CEO of the Post Office on this particular issue and what he said, and it was his choice to write that letter. I think today's statement and Thursday's statement illustrate that's had no influence on us in that we think this is the right thing to do. We've been very clear all the way through that some people guilty people will be made innocent through this process, and we think that's a risk worth taking, and least worst option. In terms of influence on compensation and other matters for individuals, as I say, we have made sure there are independent processes as part of run right through these compensation schemes. We have the advisory board holding our feet to the fire, which they do very effectively, and I welcome their work as well in that regard.
Carla Lockhart.
Mr Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Minister for his statement and thank him for his efforts in this regard. The Minister will be aware, as has been alluded to by my Northern Ireland colleagues, of correspondence from the Executive Office and the Department of Justice. It is a rarity that you get three parties in Northern Ireland actually agreeing on something, and I do believe it is outrageous that we have a situation that Northern Ireland is being excluded, and I would ask the Minister to redouble his efforts to rethink this. We're told time and time again that this Parliament is sovereign. We've seen this Parliament intervene on laws and legislation in Northern Ireland that is devolved, and I would ask him today to go away and relook at this situation with urgency.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, can I thank you for her question, and I can assure I'll continue to engage with her and the relevant representatives within the Justice Ministry in Northern Ireland on these particular issues, as with our officials. I understand her disappointment, I understand her preference, and that's some of the ministers in the Justice Department, but we'll continue that engagement and seek to try and make sure that nobody in Northern Ireland, the compensation is not denied or delayed, just as we don't want to see that in England either, England and Wales either.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Thank the Minister. On page 2 of his statement then, we thank the Minister very much for his statement, the update, and he referred to family officers or family members or direct employees. On behalf of family members, I wish to ask a question. With news media over the weekend indicated that 250 people have passed away, victims of the Post Office Horizon scandal, some of those with no knowledge whatsoever that their names would ever be cleared and compensation would come. Will the Minister indicate that every one of those people will have their family members compensated, and that help and advice will be available, and that they will receive an apology on behalf of their loved ones, and that this will be done as soon as possible. Thank you.
Well, I certainly apologise to all those people he refers to, and I read the reports as well this weekend about the number of people who passed away. Indeed, one of my constituents, Sam Harrison of Norton near Helmsley, passed away last May, one of the original 555, prior to receiving compensation, which is devastating for the family. Though, to be clear, those claims can still go forward, and the family and their estates will be compensated to the same degree, but nevertheless, a slim comfort in those situations. When we refer to family members, is those directly affected in terms of those who may have suffered a conviction, a prosecution by Post Office or CPS. That's what that refers to, but clearly another family members can be compensated through the wider process. For example, where a house has been lost or a bankruptcy has happened, those can benefit through those routes in terms of compensation to the family in general, but very happy to have a discussion where everything thinks we need to look at in that particular area.
Order. Order. The honourable gentleman will find out that I like to observe the courtesies of the House. That concludes the proceedings on the statement. May I thank the Minister and the Opposition front bench for their attendance. Point of order, Mr Gullis.
Thank you very much.